The real reason willpower never fixes procrastination. You know exactly what you need to do. You've known for days, maybe weeks, and yet here you are, reorganizing your desk, making your third coffee, checking your emails for something that probably isn't there, doing anything except the thing. And the strangest part? The more it matters, the harder it gets. The higher the stakes, the more frozen you feel. Here's what's actually going on. This isn't a discipline problem. It isn't even really a time management problem. It's a threat response, and your brain is running it on autopilot. In this episode, you're going to understand exactly why willpower keeps failing and what to do instead that actually works. You're listening to Your Space Today, the podcast where we decode fatigue, stress, and burnout so you can rise again. Every Tuesday, we explore the hidden connections between your habits, your health, and your happiness, giving you the tools to take back your energy and your life. Picture Zoe, 36 years old, doctoral researcher, clearly sharp, the kind of person who can hold a complex argument in her head for hours, who reads widely, who knows her subject in deep detail. She has been given 3 extensions on her thesis submission. Not because she doesn't know what to write. She knows exactly what to write. But she cannot bring herself to open the document. Instead, she reads more papers. She organizes her reference library with precision. She attends every seminar going. She is, in almost every measurable way, a conscientious, hard-working person. She's just not writing the thesis. People around her have started using the word discipline, as if that's what's missing. As if Zoe just needs to try harder, want it more, hold herself accountable. But here's what none of those people understand. Zoe is experiencing one of the most well-documented patterns in academic psychology. And it has almost nothing to do with discipline. If you've ever watched yourself not do something you genuinely wanted to do, if you've ever felt that strange, almost paralyzed gap between knowing and doing, you already understand what Zoe is living through. Because procrastination, the real kind, the chronic kind, doesn't feel like laziness from the inside. It feels like a wall you can see clearly, but can't walk through. You can describe the wall in detail. You can explain exactly how ridiculous it is that the wall is there. And it doesn't move. What most advice gets wrong is that it treats procrastination as a motivation problem. And so the solutions it offers are motivation-based. Rewards, deadlines, accountability partners, productivity systems, 5-second rules. These approaches are not useless. For mild avoidance, structure and momentum often do help. But for chronic avoidance, rooted in a genuine threat response, they tend to fall short. They're addressing the surface when the real problem runs deeper. Zoe has tried most of them. The structure is there, the motivation is there. She wants to finish her thesis more than almost anything. The issue is happening somewhere quieter, somewhere older, somewhere the rational brain doesn't really have jurisdiction. In a few minutes, I'll show you what actually moves the needle. And it's not what productivity culture has been selling you. But here's where this gets really interesting. Because to understand the solution, you first have to understand what's driving the avoidance. And when you see it, the whole pattern clicks into place. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala. It's ancient, older than language, older than planning, older than the part of you that makes to-do lists. Its job, at the most basic level, is to scan the environment for threat. And when it finds one, it acts fast. The amygdala doesn't wait for a committee meeting. It doesn't evaluate your spreadsheet. It fires, and your body responds. Tension, hesitation, a sudden urgent need to do something else. Anything else. Here's the thing that most people miss. The amygdala doesn't only respond to physical threats. It responds to psychological ones too. And one of the most reliable ways to trigger a threat response is to face a task where failure has real identity implications. A task that means nothing produces almost no signal. You'll do the washing up without drama. You'll file those documents. Fine, easy, done. But a task that matters, where the outcome says something about who you are, what you're capable of, whether you're enough, that's a different story. The more the work means to you, the stronger the signal. The stronger the signal, the harder it becomes to start. This is what Zoe is up against every time she opens her laptop. Her thesis isn't just a document. It's years of her life, her intellectual identity, her sense of whether she can actually do this. The amygdala reads all of that, and it files it under danger. Researchers have actually looked inside the brains of people who struggle with this kind of avoidance. A study from Ruhr-Universität Bochum scanned 264 adults and measured their capacity for action control. That is, their ability to initiate an intention and follow through on it, a faculty closely linked to procrastination tendency. What they found makes this concrete. People with weaker action control tended to have a larger amygdala and, crucially, a weaker functional connection between the amygdala and the part of the brain responsible for regulating it, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. When that connection is weak, the emotional alarm bells ring louder, and the action-oriented part of the brain struggles to override them. The study's authors note that this is the neural architecture underlying hesitation and avoidance, the same pattern Zoe experiences every time she opens her laptop. And the emotional regulation piece goes even deeper than that. A paper published in Social and Personality Psychology Compass reframes what procrastination actually is. Not a failure of time management, but a failure of emotional regulation. The argument is elegant and, once you hear it, impossible to unsee. People don't procrastinate because they can't organize their time. They procrastinate because they're avoiding the emotional state the task produces, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the quiet fear of finding out they're not as capable as they hoped. And in the short term, avoidance works perfectly. The discomfort disappears the moment you close the document. The brain notes this. Avoidance is rewarded. The problem is what happens next. Because avoidance doesn't make the task smaller. It makes the threat signal bigger. Every day Zoe doesn't open her document, her amygdala updates its assessment. This thing is dangerous. This thing is to be avoided. By the time she sits down again, the barrier has quietly grown. If this is true, if procrastination is fundamentally an emotional response, not a planning failure, then most advice is pointing in exactly the wrong direction. Here's the thing that keeps people stuck the longest: the shame. Because when you know you should be doing something and you're not doing it, you don't just feel stuck. You feel bad about feeling stuck. You run the internal commentary. Why can't I just start? What is wrong with me? Other people manage this. And that commentary feels productive, like it should motivate you. But what it actually does is pour fuel on the threat system. Self-criticism activates stress. Stress activates the amygdala. A more activated amygdala makes initiation harder. So every time Zoe sits down and thinks, I should just be able to do this, she is, without meaning to, making it less likely that she will. The shame spiral isn't a side effect of procrastination, it's a driver of it. And this is why the usual fixes don't hold. Willpower-based strategies treat the prefrontal cortex, the rational planning brain, as if it's in charge. But it isn't. Not when the amygdala is running a threat response. You can't reason your way out of a fear response. You have to change the threat signal itself. What's also worth understanding is that this doesn't happen in isolation. The same system, the stress system, the emotional regulation system, is being shaped by everything else in your life. Sleep is one of the biggest. Research is clear that poor sleep significantly increases amygdala reactivity, meaning the same task that feels manageable on a good night becomes genuinely harder to approach the morning after a bad one. Zoe's worst procrastination days aren't random. They follow bad nights. What you eat may matter too. There's emerging evidence that disrupted blood glucose, the kind associated with skipping meals or highly processed food, can reduce the brain's capacity for emotional self-regulation, particularly during cognitively demanding periods. The research here is not as settled as the sleep findings, and the mechanisms are complex. But the general principle holds. A brain running low on stable energy isn't at its best for overriding threat responses. Physical movement works in the other direction. A substantial body of research shows that regular aerobic exercise has anxiolytic and stress buffering effects. It supports the brain's capacity for self-regulation and, over time, appears to build resilience to the kinds of stress that make avoidance feel necessary. And the self-talk that runs alongside procrastination, the criticism, the catastrophizing, the comparison, is itself a physiological stressor. Research on rumination consistently shows that repetitive negative thinking keeps the body's stress systems activated well beyond the original moment that triggered them. Every loop of, I should have started this by now, isn't just an uncomfortable thought. It's fuel that keeps the system elevated. What this means is that the way out isn't a better productivity system. It's a calmer nervous system. If you want to go deeper on any of this, we have articles on our website that explore how these factors interact, how they compound each other, and how one unaddressed issue can quietly trigger the next. There are also free downloadable resources if you want something you can actually use. The link is below. So the real question becomes, what can we actually do about the threat signal itself? Let's talk about it step by step. Because the shift here is real, it's backed by solid research, and it requires understanding why it works, not just what to do. The core problem is what you might call an open-ended threat. When Zoe looks at her thesis, her brain doesn't see a document. It sees an unresolved, high-stakes situation with no defined endpoint. And open-ended, high-stakes situations are exactly what the amygdala responds to most strongly. The longer the task feels, the bigger the exposure, the louder the signal. So the solution isn't to push through the signal with more willpower. It's to change the shape of the task so the signal is smaller. Here's the experiment worth trying. Before you approach any task you've been avoiding, make yourself one very specific agreement. Not, I'll work on this today. Not, I'll try to get something done. This agreement. I will work on this for 5 minutes only. At 5 minutes, I am fully permitted to stop. And mean it. The permission to stop has to be real. This isn't a trick to get yourself going and then secretly stay, though that's often what happens. This is a genuine contract with yourself. 5 minutes. Then done if you choose. What this does neurologically is change the scale of the threat. An open-ended task says, you must expose yourself to this danger for an unknown period of time with no guarantee of how it will feel. A 5-minute capped trial says something very different. This is bounded, finite, and survivable. The amygdala responds to perceived threat scale. Reduce the scale, and you reduce the signal. The psychological research on implementation intentions supports this kind of bounded, concrete commitment. The idea is straightforward. Specifying exactly when, where, and how you will begin an action, rather than leaving it as a vague intention, dramatically improves follow-through. A meta-analysis in Advances in Experimental Social Psychology found a consistent medium to large effect on goal attainment. The 5-minute commitment works along the same lines. It transforms a vague and threatening intention into a small, specific, survivable act. It turns, I need to work on my thesis, into, at 9 a.m., I will open the document and write for 5 minutes. That shift is deceptively powerful. Research on graded task initiation, approaching avoided tasks in deliberately small, low-stakes steps, consistently shows that lowering the entry barrier produces better results than increasing motivation or adding external pressure. It's counterintuitive because our instinct is that more urgency equals more action. But for a threat-based avoidance response, more urgency tends to mean more avoidance. Self-compassion research points the same direction. Studies find that people who respond to their own failures and avoidance patterns with self-kindness rather than self-criticism show lower levels of procrastination. Not because they've become complacent, but because the shame spiral that compounds the problem stops running. Lower self-criticism, lower threat signal, lower barrier to starting. So the experiment is simply this. Pick one task you've been avoiding. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Tell yourself, genuinely, that you can stop when it goes off. Then start. That's it. Not a system, not a framework, just 5 minutes of non-threatening exposure every time you need it. What you'll likely find is that the starting is the worst part. Not the doing, not the finishing, the starting. And once you've started, once you're inside the task, the threat signal drops because you're no longer imagining the danger. You're just working. The amygdala learns from experience. Give it enough non-threatening starts, and it begins to update its assessment. The file stops being labeled danger. The opening becomes slowly less weighted. Zoe set herself a rule. 5 minutes, then permission to close. She didn't announce it. She didn't tell anyone. She just opened her document at 9:04 on a Tuesday morning and wrote 140 words. Then 80 more. The thesis didn't suddenly become easy, but the next day, opening it took a little less effort. And the day after that, a little less still. No single morning felt like a turning point, but somewhere in the accumulation of small starts, in the quiet, repeated evidence that the file was survivable, the threat signal began to lose its grip. That's the mechanism. Not discipline, not motivation, just enough non-threatening exposure for the brain to begin updating its assessment. Thank you for listening. In the next episode, we look at something that affects almost everyone who works at a desk and almost no one correctly identifies. You're at your computer. You have everything you need. And somehow, nothing gets done. You write half a sentence, check a message, come back, stare at the screen, write another half. The day ends and the list is untouched. Most people look at that day and see laziness. What they're actually seeing is a tax, one the brain charges every time it's asked to switch from one thing to another. Multitasking feels productive. The research says otherwise. And once you understand what's actually happening, you'll never look at your working day quite the same way. That's next. Until then, take care of yourself. You deserve it. Your Space Today is published every Tuesday at 6 p.m. For detailed information, disclaimers, scientific references, visit the links below this podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider regarding any health concerns.